Chair. We are
The planning board meeting for August 20th, 2025. Start with roll call. Brian Balcom.
Here.
Ken Bluestein.
Here.
Alden Clark is not here. Tony Palmisano is not here. Jamie Pennington.
Here.
Painter. Here. Jack McCare is not here. Matt Heffron.
Here.
We have, just general business tonight. So Matt, I'll be asking you to vote on anything we vote on. First item of business is 94 A&R application.
I believe we may have someone here representing the applicant here, but I'm also happy to speak to this briefly, just from the office's perspective, if you'd like.
Sure.
So, yeah, thank you. The plan that I showed up on the screen here is the approval not required plan underneath the subdivision control law. There's two different types of permit paths, essentially. One is the approval not required. It's a confusing term that's used. Or the other one is a full subdivision where they're actually constructing roadways and you're reviewing and approving the construction of that roadway prior to build out of the lots. We've seen that overlapping with some recent permitting for courts and lanes, for instance. In this case, the smoother path or shorter path to approval of something called an approval not required plan is essentially to get to show that the lots are buildable because they have frontage on a way that can be reached, particularly in terms of public safety. So here off of Ferry Road, there's a lot off of Ferry Road where it intersects with Plant Street. There's a larger lot that they're looking to carve into 3 lots that are facing onto Plant Street. They've gone through another permit path for demolition of the structure of the historic ordinances. But in order to get access to those lots underneath the subdivision control law, the planning board is required to look at these plans and verify that there's adequate access to the lots. When they initially came, just as context, briefly, when they initially came into the office, we had noted a little bit of concern because the condition of the roadway, both its width and its pavement condition, they were told that there might be a concern here in terms of the review under the statute because the adequacy of the access might be in question. Fire department weighed in, feeling that 20 feet was at least was necessary. They have since, there are some photographs that they provided. They have widened the pavement. This is, as I understand it, in a sort of temporary condition. They've also, to my understanding, talked with the director of public services about after they've built out the lots, after they've brought construction vehicles back and forth, that they would resurface this. And I'll defer to them on that discussion. I just have that brief information from the director based on the discussion they had. But the difference between these two permit paths, the subdivision is something where they're coming in and proposing to do the carve off of lots. They have to build the construction standards shown you. For the approval, they're essentially saying the roadway is adequate already for us to get to the lots. So in this case, the planning board has to determine is there adequate access to the lots. For the fire department's purposes, they can get to the lots now. The condition of the roadway is obviously not great. It should be clear that this is a private way. But as far as the final conditions, I think I had initially assumed that they were resurfacing the entire length of the entire width of this, so to speak. I don't take issue with that mainly because as long as they resurface this at the end of the day when they're done with the construction, that would be consistent with the discussion. I understand they have the director of public services. At the end of the day, under your review, it's mainly about can they get physical access to and from the lots. Obviously, there are other lots, a number of other lots on the street already, but the concern was primarily raised that, at least at a bare minimum under the statute, that the 17 to 18 feet that was on the original plan. Discussion with the fire department, they confirmed feet. The applicant has gone out there and applied that using the strip on the edge. They were essentially do so. So if you have any questions, obviously I'd be happy to speak to the office's end of it, but the applicant's reps.
Just clarification, you said it's a public way, right?
Yeah, to my understanding, the city may have done some maintenance responsibilities over the years, but it's not been accepted by the city to my knowledge. There is a filter down the end, I guess, then formally accepted by the city. So again, it's just to make it clear for the record, there's no indication here that the city it'd just be a different situation. If the city was, had oversight of this roadway, we might be having a bigger discussion about improvements in this context.
So under the subdivision control act, it does not need to be a public way, just, it can be a public or private way. And the private way, this is a private way that's essentially open.
Correct. And one that the board has to reasonably determine is at least reasonably accessible, particularly for the case of fire department, works.
So this can't, the private, even though it's a private way, it can't be closed to public access. So it's the same thing as.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just when we say public, I was thinking more, so most people in discussion, context like the city council, the general public, is the idea of maintenance. So city doesn't have any financial responsibility to maintain this private way, unless it's been accepted.
It's not in any worse condition than one.
And again, at the end of the day, I mean, they were a little bit concerned that you usually have about development, whether it's there's something unusual about say the configuration of these lots under zoning per se, sort of standard, lots, but obviously the residents were concerned about the condition of the roadway. So here, at the end of the day, at least there's going to be an improvement of the both the width and the paved condition of that roadway. I would note for the record, there's no, to my understanding, there's not any expectation that they're going to be paving further than say the lots that they need to access, of course, although that would be nice. But I think here the access issue for the subdivision control lot is really about the frontage.
The road narrows again to 17 feet beyond this.
Beyond, yeah, the discussion we had with them was that they had to widen it for the physical access to their lots. And yeah, obviously there is a discussion, I think a parallel discussion, public services is looking into the cost of paving the remaining piece of that, but I can't speak to. So relatively simple review by the planning board under the statute. It's really just a question of is there access to the lots? It's not a review of the development scheme, it's, dictated by the zoning ordinance, if anything is needed by the zoning appeals that would go there. These are relatively standardized lots, so you expect maybe single family homes here. But at the end of the day, the access to the lots was the question. So obviously, I have no objection to enforcement.
Any other questions or comments? So I'll ask for a motion.
Motion to endorse the A&R. Motion to endorse the A&R.
Everybody's here, so we can do this by a show of hands. All those in favor? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. The next item on the agenda is 105 State Street, and for the board's benefit, this is only a review of the application for completeness. We are not voting on any special permits or other requests this evening. So just a review for completeness.
Thank you. You want to speak to that as well? Yeah, so again, not representing the applicant, just the office, but this is a pretty typical process for smaller projects where the site plan review criteria, just to clarify the process here, by the way, for most folks, the process here is that the applicant submits a site plan application with the various materials. Planning board has a public hearing and meeting on that. Like other permits that might be involved in a project. In this case, the applicants asked for a waiver of one of the initial submission requirements. This is not a typical request for smaller scale projects, unlike the say the 40R district or something like the Kmart project that's being reviewed by the zoning board of appeals right now, bigger project of 212 units. For smaller scale projects, it's not unusual for applicants to ask for a waiver of submission of voluminous reports that may not add substantially to the substantive review by the board. So they have asked for a waiver of that piece. The office takes no exception to that request for a waiver. It seems reasonable in the context of the size and scale of the project. As the chair mentioned, you're not reviewing the plan itself. The project that will be reviewed at your subsequent meeting, and provided, of course, the board has to review the question of whether to grant the waiver. The waiver in this case is basically a community and environmental impact sort of statement about its quote unquote impact on the community. based on the size and scale of the project, its location and whatnot, the office takes no, has no particular objection to the waiving of that submission requirement. Everything else has been submitted and is in the.
I think I know the answer to this, but, our action tonight, the people who are acting on this tonight will not affect who is able to vote on it when it comes to us next.
Correct.
This is not like missing a year,
Correct, yeah, thank you, yeah. Luckily, nothing.
because there are people who miss it.
Yeah, there's one Board of Appeals who has a longer hearing process for the Plaza Landing scheme. We have to be very concerned about the tenants. Because it's going to go over 6 periods.
Any questions or comments about?
Just one question. I know that we asked for some supplemental information. Was that submitted?
You say supplemental? Yeah, there was some lighting material submitted, so maybe that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
one of them.
Yeah.
I think maybe that was the only one.
Uh,
I don't recall, but I know we talked about a couple of.
Yeah, there were some subsequent, traffic memo, light fixtures,
Some about signage maybe too. Did we
I
ask?
don't recall off the top of my head, but we can follow up on that piece of that. I thought there was some detail on the plan.
There's
maybe
a
we're-
comment that there will be no signage other than the building address.
Okay, that's how we ended up.
Andy, can I speak to this? No, no, not yet.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Wayne Wilcox with 105 State Street.
Please,
Wayne Wilcox, 105 State Street, 10 Harrison Street. So no new signage. We are retaining, there is, for sign restored, we have, and we did it one. Paul Dark second.
any other questions? Be appropriate to make a few comments.
Yeah, generally speaking, if there's anything that's helpful for the applicant, it would be beneficial, but generally speaking, if it is probably sort of tied to the question of completeness vote, and then the subsequent things are relative to the hearing process itself, but from an efficiency perspective and liking to see issues resolved, it's sometimes helpful for applicants to know in advance, so they can try to address issues and be more responsive to the city's board's concerns.
So I don't have any issues particularly with the completeness of the application, but just a couple of comments about the site plan, just for your information, for when you come back for a more formal presentation. There are 13 parking spaces provided. 2 of them are out by the street in a separate driveway. I'm not sure I really looked favorably on those 2 spaces. You exceed the parking requirement with 11 spaces. So I'm just putting that out there, that it would be nice to get those 2 parking spaces away from the street if you could. That's just my opinion, there may be other opinions contrary to that. More importantly, the main entrance to the building, the way I understand this, is on what would be the south side of the building, adjacent to the driveway, but I don't see on the plan any pedestrian access from the public way to that entrance. And I think that's,
So you would want to see, so, sorry, this is helpful, thank you. The driveway on the south from, so there wouldn't be a public access.
if I'm a visitor to the building, I have to walk up the driveway to get to the front door. I don't think that's a great solution.
You would want me to see if there's like a brick sidewalk next to the driveway.
I think you need, I
Perhaps.
think you need a separate pedestrian access from the public way to the front door. That's for a visitor, that's for the mailman, that's for deliveries, that's for anybody who is on foot approaching the building. Those are my 2 comments from a review of the. Any other comments about, no? will ask for a motion relative to completeness of the package and granting.
So I would make a motion to grant some waiver and determine the application complete.
I second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. Application is complete. Um,
Sure, so just
you want to say about that?
briefly, yeah, just if it's helpful to save any time, give a little context briefly. This is just a plan. It's a little bit hard to see without the aerial photograph. I tend to like plans with aerial photographs underneath. I think it's easier to see, but if you can all recognize our wastewater treatment facility here off of Water Street at the bottom of the screen. The hand. So this is Water Street right here. This is our wastewater treatment facility. You can see the tanks right there. The building, the brick building that you might be familiar with is here next to the driveway. And this is the bike path, on the river near the river. So for context, that's where we are. This letter is from an abutter who had sort of blanketed city officials whether or not they're directly involved in permitting or review of this project. Per se, like where, obviously is being copied here, but there are others who are more directly involved in review. The city is in essence trying to, just like with the revetment project that was done, with bike path was raised on top of that, to protect the plant from storm surge, sea overrise increases that are projected, like some of our other capital projects. We're also looking to surround the plant on the two sides, leading up to at least the elevation of Water Street, because of their still vulnerability of water coming around the sides, essentially. So while there's longer term considerations for the city, we know that we have quote unquote vulnerable infrastructure near the water's edge. And so this abutter was at the time, I think, primarily focused on comments going to the Conservation Commission, where there's a review of this in their jurisdiction. But it's in essence just a wall going on the outside of the perimeter of the existing facility, with some temporary openings that would be put in during storms, for access points. But that would basically better protect the plant for a longer duration and, a couple of decades out, to stay ahead of inundation that could shut the plant down, which everybody depends on. So in this case, it was a letter addressing concerns there. And that is actually on the next Conservation Commission meeting. They were going to be meeting last night, but unfortunately didn't have a quorum, so that matter got continued. That's the context, I guess, of that. And I'm not sure the board here has anything directly to do with that view per se. The Conservation Commission is reviewing it, and they have a discussion about how water is treated around the facility, in the facility, inundation patterns, whether it comes from sheet flow downhill or inundation from the riverside. Well, situation, but there's been extensive review of that. So.
Right. On to approval of minutes. Given comments on both of these, 618 and 716. Anyone else?
I have as well.
Anyone else have comments on them?
Just that I will stay in June's.
And I was absolutely 16.
So let's do a motion first for the June 18th.
Move to approve the amendments.
All those in favor? Okay, for July 16th. Motion,
Move to approve the
all those in favor? Direct report on to
Okay.
news about the Story Avenue rezoning.
So, as I mentioned to Brian when he came in, we have finally heard back from our grant administrator from the state, and they are, although I'm still waiting for the signed contract, they finally sent back an updated contract for this fiscal year we did have discussions about actually trying to do it in the last fiscal year. Again, at this point, I'm just satisfied that we're close to the loop. So at any rate, I'm waiting for the state's return of that contract now, but they did get me an updated contract reflecting this fiscal year. We have it until June 30th. So incidentally, because it's next on your agenda tonight, discussion about any comments you might have on the Plaza Landings Kmart project, which is right inside that area. We will now be able to pick up and work with a consultant to try to create the visualization to go with proposed zoning changes that we'll be discussing. And my plan is to reach out to the city council and sort of find out what kind of level of attendance and participation they can have with us, going forward. We'll be meeting with our subcommittee. I did want to confirm the level of interest in folks that we took when we left off for that sort of daytime stuff to kind of make progress between the meetings. So I just want to verify continued interest in that. But basically pick up that in terms of the consultants' work on the zoning change itself, those two things working in parallel, and to look beyond the Kmart Plaza Landings development itself, the development at one site, and actually look at to look at the larger, this is, BS open, but the larger Plaza Landings area, going into Port Plaza, including off from Short the parking lot, market basket site. So that whole sort of area, envisioning it, looking at blocks, looking at property blocks, streetscapes, scale of buildings, allowances, creating more mixed use, walkability, and so forth. So at any rate, we will finally be able to dig into that. Although it will not, I think, directly influence the Kmart Plus Landings redevelopment. There's these things can work in parallel to some degree, and certainly it's good timing to get ahead of zoning changes and potential redevelopment that can happen elsewhere, given the Kmart redevelopment being so-called safe harbor status. So if you have any questions, let me know. But on that front, I just want to let you know that we'll be able to pick that up again. So I'll circle back to the committee with you as members. We can pick up, just keep up the agenda, come back with regular updates. We're making progress there. I think to me, it's important that we have the consultants able to help us through that process. But also we go to city council and present the zoning. We're talking through making certain changes. Again, multi-family residential, walk, things like that. Feels the urban design, welcoming nature of it.
Who is the subcommittee?
So I just want to confirm still interest, but Brian, Jamie, yeah. Yeah.
Yes, still interested.
Yeah, me too.
Unless there's unless there's more competition. The plan was to circle back at the whole board anyway, just to try to make progress. Also happy to touch base with folks, elsewhere, individually, try to make progress, raise feedback as we go along. But basically, the plan is to circle back by spring of 26. To circle back with a report to the city council, proposes some zoning changes here and illustrates some of those beneficial changes, and we've also got education and awareness of what we're talking about. Input on it.
What is the status of consultant?
Great question. So actually, thank you. So I've been talking with Gamble Associates. Gamble Associates. I can send information on that. It's the team that we are currently expected to review in very short order some of the architectural and urban design elements of the Plaza Landings project for the ZBA as a peer review. So while they did take up the usual sort of civil engineering peer review that you might expect for a site plan that you always have before you, they here also decided to have a peer review, so to speak, of the architecture. It's a little bit different in this context to do something like that, only because it is a 40B, and so scale is something that there's a little bit more latitude for size and scale of the project per se than 40B. But trying to apply proper standards in which the things I think you're going to be talking about momentarily, things that can improve either the building, and I kind of think also the site, pedestrian access, bicycle access, things like that, streetscape, the block network that can sort of be created going the driveway. As opposed to just So at any rate, they'll give us, the board, I should say, they'll give the board some feedback. Your response to the concerns that are raised, and, you might see some typical, like review, and some might actually be overlapping directly. In the way I'll communicate as a board to the ZBA for their consideration.
So are Gamble architects or engineers or both?
Well, architects, yeah.
And where are they located? Do they have planning background as well as?
They
architecture?
have some planning background as well. Urban design is a focus of theirs, so.
I'm just thinking about, there's an architectural piece, but it's not translating that into zoning, which is.
Yes, yes. And I should make it clear, by the way, and this is a career discussion using the program, is because of the desire and there's a need for sort of bandwidth from the consultants' work on the rendering and visualization side of it. I have expressed a little bit less concern about the consultant working on the zoning end, recognizing that that's something that we do have some expertise in house to work on. So while I do want their input on that, I'm much more concerned that they can help us with the visualization piece of it, the planning piece of it, the urban design piece of it, rather than having them focus, a lot of their time on a bunch of edits going back and forth over in the weeds of the legal language of the zoning amendment itself. Also, just because of the discussion about the hours we could do a rendering or modeling of this versus that, wanting to do probably a couple of iterations and variations on that to adapt, get feedback here and then make changes to come back with something that's, closer to exactly what we're looking for that, which again, this is an iterative process that informs the zoning and, vice versa. For us to get up the tail end, I wanted to keep the bandwidth and the resources and the time. Those types of things rather than something that might already have. I guess Lynn leads an Andy.
Well, that's progress. I mean, we're at the next phase.
Yeah. Again, I mean, I was mainly just worried about what it was like a black hole for like a good long time there, but finally circled back and said, oh, pick it up again. So expecting that shortly. We'll circle back with you all next week. I can't, unfortunately, between now and the week to this, but circle back next week. So, and does the Thursday time will be a time use of that, generally speaking, still work for meeting that we-
I had a walk, which is why I sent you a notice on that, and I was just checking and see if it might lift. At the moment, that's time still.
Okay, so maybe we could, I don't know if we should change it, but we could figure out a time that does work for the subcommittee. I think originally we were talking like a Thursday morning. We could switch to, again, as long as I don't have a conflict, I'm happy to go wherever, but just want to find a time to work for the subcommittee to kind of meet up on a weekly basis with consultant, and then between circling back. But again, it doesn't have to get sorted out here, but here, we can figure out a time that does work.
And Wednesdays and Fridays are better now. Know that we had an alternate.
I know Tuesdays is my only bad day. I can do Friday.
Fridays.
Fridays, mornings,
Okay, Friday, let's try.
Any, I mean, is anywhere between 8 and 12 good? Earlier better?
Yeah.
So 8 is not too early? Well, we can, we do 8. Just want to make sure there's different time. Makes no difference to me, I just.
That's fine, I'm fine too.
Yeah, that's fine.
But-
Brian could drink coffee. Okay. So last item is Plaza Landing. I had asked all of you to try to take a look at the plans that have been submitted so far. Put together any comments that you might have. The idea is compile all of these comments in a letter and send that to the ZBA just so they have our comments and input as they start to dig into their overall review. So I think if we can just briefly discuss your comments tonight, and then I would ask if you could send them to direct report, copy me on it. We'll start to put this into a single document and one way or the other, either I think probably have a draft available that we can circulate and try next meeting.
And that'll be good timing, because right now they're focused on traffic and, they're gonna probably go into some civil engineering issues and following some good meetings. I don't want to prejudice them because they see some flexibility in the review process, but that's probably the sequence will go at this point. So that gives some time, here for you to come back and, you know, flush together your board, your comments. They can take that into account with what they might be getting from peer review architect. Just, you know, commenting on that aspect of it.
Do any of you want to volunteer any comments, Brian? Do you have any?
Yeah, I do. I know when we left last time, we were talking about the driveway entering from the roadway up into the site. And on a plan, it shows that that's actually the property of that parcel. So I struggle with how that is. And, you know, there's probably a legal piece that they'll get through, but I just don't see it as functional. So the question is, and maybe it's for the existing landowner, is there anything that connects that to move that road or somehow define that road as an internal roadway? Because right now, I mean, it's on a plan that'll be constructed, but if you own it and it's your property, you can do a lot. You can put speed bumps, you can, you know, you can put, you know, directional signs. So it just seems to me that that's a missing piece. And I don't know if it's being picked over, if traffic has concern, because that particular roadway, as we all know, is not functional to begin with. And now you have a big mass, you have line of sight, you have all those issues that you would, in a complete plan review, we would spend hours on that, right? Or consulting hours or something. So
So my thought is that they can't really go there until they know what the entrance to Low Street will look like, what it will entail. Then they can plan that out, and obviously it will probably shift in some manner, maybe to the west, as it's very close to the building on the current plans. And they may take from some of those spots on the left too, on the west side.
Well, and just to be clear, to my understanding, there's not yet anyway, and we did, by the way, receive additional traffic, by the way. So for those of you who are familiar with it, we can point you to it if you need a reminder, but on OpenGov, the ZBA's permit hearing for this is listed already on OpenGov as a record comp, you know, for a comprehensive permit -25 for the year, -1 is the first comprehensive permit we got in the year. So anyway, that record that we've provided the info to, and we can push out again. All that information there is now more attachments being added, and some part of that is the traffic analysis piece. So there's some exchanges going back and forth now between the consultants, the board will take into account. There'll also be the urban design or architectural piece of that, and some other things that you'll see there. So unfortunately, that list is going to get longer with more attachments. We'll have to kind of, you know, sort of look at and then weigh in on or be aware of things going to add in sense. But some of it's just public comment. But it should be noted that, to my understanding, there is no current plan or proposal to do any improvements other than the sort of basic sidewalk connectivity, some striping, you know, in that driveway. There isn't a proposal to make changes within this driveway outside of the red boundary you see. I think largely it's sort of the portion of the larger Port Plaza parcel that was vacant. So this is basically reactivating that area. But to your point in your own discussion, it doesn't necessarily make an ideal connection or the best possible connection to a larger site. It doesn't necessarily address future connectivity and things like that. So, you know, for the driveway, for instance, we're only seeing improvements on the one side of the street, not necessarily the other side.
Brian, are you saying there's no commitment to the configuration of that road?
Correct.
Correct. No control.
And you know, you have one parcel butting up to another, but it's a road.
Yeah.
So that just lends itself to, that roadway is more important to everyone in that plaza than even the residents. So I don't know how we flag that, or if we make a comment and it gets picked up by the traffic analysis, but
I think beyond that, it's hard, when you look at the plan, the plans conflict with each other. Right? The architectural plan conflicts with the civil engineering plan.
Yeah.
And so according to the civil engineering plan, I think it's a sloping road. According to the architectural plan, it's flat for the first 65 feet and then starts to. So so something has to happen to that road, and it seems like the city should not be able to approve this permit without having some design for that road.
Right.
To your point. And of course, when you look at something like this, it's hard to see. It's hard to see any slope because of the way the camera works, and everything like that. But, so you're right about that. I think that there should be, as part of the planning process, across the easement, that the new parcel has control over that drive, has some jurisdiction of what happens. Similarly, on the north side of the parcel, there is a circulation road going across the front of the parcel. And the handicap parking spaces that serve this parcel are on another parcel. And there's no control over those handicap parking spaces. So,
You're basically driving through a parking lot to get to the front door.
well, it's a two-way street that handicap people have to cross from the handicap parking spaces to get to the front door. It's just a really,
So striking, direction, all those things
all
that
that stuff, yeah.
we would have, you're right, maybe timing, but we don't control either one,
Right.
which is not.
Well, but it's a great point you raised, and this is part of the reason why some of the ZBA members have asked for, and we provided them what we could. I know the applicants provided some materials as well, but we pointed to the prior permit records, including things like subdivision site plan approvals for the larger site. Because of the connectivity issues and some of the overlap here, they had wanted to see the relationship to prior approvals at the site, because when you carve out the 40B piece of that, what does it do to those things, including things like your frontage, your access, things like that. So those are all reasonable considerations, and that's when there's several different layers or reasons why I think the surrounding driveway connectivity or access points or, spines, so to speak, in this case, some physical features that are entirely outside of the rectangle. I think the red line is obviously, you can see this is an artifact of a desire to sort of carve off only the minimum footprint necessary to do a project, and not necessarily taking into account everything that we're seeing here might be tied in slightly, which in this case, we've seen, grabbing some parking spaces outside, which might be necessary to address, some of those things, whether or not that's the perfect place.
We can get into my comments later, but to the point about the handicap parking spaces in the street that goes in front of the building. I think the part of the problem there is that Shaw's has control over those parking spaces.
Correct. Yeah.
But the ideal situation would be to shift that street further north. With some parallel parking in front of the building. That's where the handicap spaces could be.
Do we know that Shaw's controls those spaces immediately?
I haven't seen the decisive plan that shows the delineation, but I think Rick is 100% spot on with that. And that, again, like I said, that's why we're seeing the starting point being the smallest rectangle to do the project. But the question then is that sufficient to deal with the project,
There's procedurally in 40B, part of this is site control, it demonstrates site control, and I think we're expanding the definition to things that the site still needs to control. So, that,
Right.
by skipping the project eligibility letter process through like a subsidizing agency and going straight to the work process, we kind of skip some of the rigor that a lender would put on this. But the city hasn't lost its leverage. The city has every right to still make these demands. So I think it just needs to revisit the site control concept that's covered by the PEL. And this could start to get at this.
Correct. And one part of the application materials is their proposed A&R plan, to break off this parcel and say there's frontage and access to the lot. And of course, that goes back to your point about, you get some access on Low Street, but what about the actual access to the building, which is the driveways? So if those things need to be fleshed out a little further, I think essentially what is not uncommon, Rick is working on this side as well. And it's only, but I think for the most part, you more often than not will see with a 40B project early on conceptual renderings or things that are not fleshed out completely. And there's obviously an understanding that some of those things are getting fleshed out with more construction details later on. I think it's probably better for everybody to have a little more detail up front here for everything like this, but where the planning board might be expecting right out of the gates a clear and coherent plan where all the drawing sheets match and address these things here. We might see a revised set of plans addressing some of these things, in a subsequent revision to address, maybe the boundary, the actual project itself is changed, maybe the driveway shifts or whatever it may be. But again, I think the starting point for the applicant clearly scope is only in this red.
But I think our role here is to flag those things that we're concerned about. And if they get addressed early, that's
Yes.
great.
Yes.
But if they get shifted around and, when a plan, something else comes up and it can get lost. And like you said, I think the city has the right to have a final plan.
Yes.
And as long as we flag it and we don't lose it somewhere in the process, I think we've done
Yes.
our job.
And because I think it ties into your subdivision approval, previously to the larger, the complex that's there, site plan approval, the subdivision approval, site, which is the access, site plan approval, and the future conditions we're all looking to aim for this area, obviously, which without, from our lens, it directly relates to jurisdiction, directly relates to things we should always, address, 100% agree.
One way to kind of, one lens through which the ZBA hopefully will be looking at this is that this piece of land will definitely be owned by another entity when it's permitted. Either this group will sell it or they'll bring in new partners. It'll be a different entity, it'll have a different lender. It needs to be a limited dividend organization just to be 40B. So it should always be looked through the lens of like, does this property have everything it needs?
Just,
It was in an adversarial relationship to the
Right.
rest of the plaza.
right.
Like they might disagree at some point about access. Like that's what needs to be covered.
Jen?
First, I appreciate that way of thinking about doing it. I also just want, I may have missed this. But there were, I think in the public comments, we heard a lot of concern about the traffic on those street occasions. And since we've heard those concerns from other projects, that just by coincidence are happening also on those streets, feels important to look pretty quickly at them. And I was particularly wondering about the questions raised in Lisa Smith's letter, July 10th, I think, about the traffic study and whether the data traffic study had looked at even really the day, the most
Time of the
important
day,
data. Yeah, I mean, as a person who drives on those streets to visit my dad in the morning at Atria and then picks up my son, in the earlier afternoon at River Valley, those are pretty important times to take the data from.
Yes, that was raised as a concern by some city officials, but also by TEC, the consultant, and who's in peer review. Jeff Garrett, who's the consultant working for the applicant, has returned some additional information, I think it's today or yesterday. But we've got uploaded, and so we'll now see some exchange and review of that, but he's trying to address that with some additional data, some additional modeling, essentially. Some of it's, sort of like standard application of, expectations based on, larger, studies around the nation. Some of it's actually direct data from the locations or the area that we're starting streets. So he's got some diagrams in there and he's sort of flushed out as best he can. We'll see how the way that goes.
Sorry, is that in that new data is in the doc?
Yeah, and this is where it becomes a little bit difficult, unfortunately for all of us in the online records. So for instance, I'll just show briefly, but in the comprehensive permit record, so this is the same material you guys look at, but for the ZBA, they're looking at this comprehensive permit one. For the files that are attached there, unfortunately, because there will be more things attached, not just updates to the documents you saw listed, but also a bunch of new things at the bottom, including public comments down the bottom.
Is this the response to initial traffic?
Yeah, this response to initial traffic engineering, that's the one that we see not too long, but take a second look at the running Zoom, but it's a PDF report with the traffic consultant's narrative and then a whole bunch of, the data behind that.
Report.
So that's meant to supplement. I should note, by the way, there are two other comments that were given on traffic and parking. One from the city engineer, which is in here, and the other one from the consultant. I'm sorry, I should say, not just TC, the consultant, but also the Traffic Safety Advisory Committee of the city, which is comprised of a number of different public officials. And so there are a few comments in there that you may also want to take a look at, because those are, I think those comments in particular maybe tie in a little bit to like what might be thinking about, concern connectivity of bike lane turns, things like that.
So this new response is, it's 244 pages. Is that completing the previous analyses, or have they redone the analysis?
Quite frankly, thus far, I was not able to look at all the tables and spreadsheets attachments. I was looking through the initial because I've been dealing with million things all the time. So I was looking through the initial comments and responses they gave. I could see a few things in there, including, for instance, the mention of a single warrant analysis being met. And then, of course, they're not suggesting doing a signal, but there's a suggestion that meets the warrant analysis for a signal. So then, of course, you might see further discussion about something like that. But it is, to my understanding, providing supplemental data. My understanding is supposed to be supplemental data thrown in there to illustrate things like the other times of day that were missed in the initial analysis and might have been a concern, things like that. I have not, unfortunately, been able to look through all those yet.
So that was actually going to be one of my comments also, was in relation to the driveway not being part of the site. If we want signalization of that driveway, how that has to be somehow, it's really off-site. It's an off-site improvement. And how far can we go?
Yeah, and this might be something with this further debate, but I'm sure before another board, but the idea of mitigating a development's impacts is something that I think is kind of universally applied to development reviews.
Right.
So even in the context of 40B. So if there are improvements that are needed to the public right of way or intersecting with the public right of way or dealing with the access to the site, that is not at all unreasonable in my view under the context of 40B either to call for those improvements. That's something to debate what those particulars are, but I think if someone's suggesting that there's, you can't compel improvements that are related to those things, I don't see that a case can be made for that.
It's a very rare 40B that doesn't have off-site mitigation related to traffic access.
I think one of the arguments here is they're going to be saying, we're not creating more of a traffic problem. And I think what we need to say is, there's already a traffic problem. Driveway doesn't work right now, so therefore
Right.
you can't,
It's a failed condition.
it's a failed condition already.
Well, coincidentally, it's funny you say that because what the more recent traffic analysis essentially says, if you read the sort of narrative, it essentially says, we're not causing this traffic issue because it's already a signal warrant analysis met. So you can sort of flip the other way, basically saying, well, we're not going to do anything about it because it's already there, as opposed to,
But I think the argument should be from the city and from the zoning board, and from the city administration, is that this is your opportunity to fix this. And we shouldn't be putting a whole bunch of people there, and a whole bunch of pedestrians there, and, and not fixing the issue.
although
If under that logic, you'd never fix anything.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's like the sidewalk.
right.
It also
Side-
makes us look like we've not properly heard all of the different people,
Right.
different parts of Close Street saying, could you
Yeah.
please think about traffic?
And this is obviously this intersection, connectivity at that point, whether it's pedestrians, bicycles, cars, obviously. This is the one obvious thing that everybody, I'm sure, is thinking about in relation to this project. It's the most obvious thing that would come to mind.
If you don't do anything there, then you failed in your responsibility. Because it's-
They also added the entrance to the garage at in my opinion, uncomfortable proximity.
Yes.
So,
Very, very.
Yeah,
that's a design decision they made.
Yeah, I had noted concern about that too, just the fact that, I'm just right at the gates, the fact that, and again, these things can be worked out, but just the fact that it's, like you said, it's so close that the idea that people aren't gonna have queuing delays and things like that, trying to take turning movements so close to the intersection, it's already itself backed up,
And always the dilemma I run into mentally is there are gonna be people that come there that live there and they're so comfortable and their speed's gonna be better or more increased. Cause they're used to coming in, coming out. And there's a whole bunch of people that aren't. So when they come in and all of a sudden they see a car pulling out, it's not an unsafe condition, it's just a poor traffic condition.
Yeah.
Right? So it's kind of like you say, if you don't do anything about it, you just throw it in the towel. There are some towns that every intersection's a fail, enough, right? But they still do widening and they still do turning lane, all those things that you can do to do your best.
The baseline for the parking and traffic should not consider Kmart parking and traffic as an existing condition, and then you argue, well, with increasing the traffic. Kmart is zero. Contributing factor for Kmart is zero. So right now we're getting 200 plus cars to that vision at that intersection, and there needs to be mitigation. That to me is the sort of.
And their traffic study equated it to 2 or 3 more cars queuing per intersection. Those numbers are not consistent.
But at the peak time of the morning, when it was 200 cars, we'll say half of them have commuting responsibilities. That's very different. Slow Street is full of people getting to go with.
It's not like a retail use where.
I'm like,
traffic comes in
Kmart,
all during
right,
the day.
Yeah.
It doesn't come in at just peak.
Peak time.
I think that um, that we need to be looking at this from a vehicular safety point of view. You know, people are going, if there's a high volume, people are gonna be accepting smaller and smaller gaps. They can pull out and make a left turn. That's just gonna add to safety concerns.
I will note for the record, because obviously we've had, I've been involved obviously in our discussion related to this project leading up to now. I do think there are good things about this project, again, you know, to transform this area. It is a larger building, probably than we could see it. That's part of the 40B process, but generally speaking, but I think there are good things out of it. It's just that at the end of the day, as you're all pointing out, in my view, that has a little bit less to do with the building or, you know, size thing, because I can think of compartmentalize that be a bit. I think the site improvements that are making these connections that you're all pointing to, I think, kind of you personally, seems to me the area to focus on, and the most meaningful changes, you know, that you made.
Yeah, I would agree, and of course, our role is one of those, the little details matter too, because a good project can be tainted by the smallest of oversights. Not that we're in the oversight business, but those, you know, I participated in the Natick Mall, I know you, and it was amazing for all the masks and all the things that I know, Bob, you were doing it too. It was those little things that just got overlooked, caused a lot of trouble. Just caused a lot of trouble, and if we'd have maybe focused not so much on some things and on others, in this case, that's what we're doing. We're not criticizing, we're just making sure that we're, you know, we do the best we can.
Thinking about this in the context of the broader story. You know, and what we're talking about here also applies to that future development, almost in a much bigger way.
Yeah.
There's more density. So we need to start talking about impacts and mitigation.
Absolutely, we'll bring more business to that area. I like the idea of potentially moving that garage further away from the street, but I don't know that the grade would allow. I don't know if there's enough room to do it. Increasing from there.
See, that's why I think because we're looking at that rectangle, we're limiting ourselves to what we can look at. So if you move the driveway back, there's two ways to solve that, because then you're gonna have a slope down to the garage. You can do that by moving the driveway west.
Yes.
And give yourself more slope, or you can do that by moving the garage entrance in under the building, give yourself some slope. But as long as we're just stuck with that rectangle building right at the edge, then you're right, you can't do that,
A
but
lot of writing.
if that driveway can move 30 feet to the west, instead of being where it is right now,
Effectively, underutilized parking.
yeah, you have a lot more flexibility.
Great.
But the problem there is, I thought about that, then I looked, I pulled out, and then we don't have a cross intersection with the driveway for Hodges too. That's the logical
Right.
place for that to be.
Yeah.
So even if that's site's redeveloped, that driveway should probably stay.
Yeah, I might say this for myself, I'm not as fixated, I was sort of initially fixated on that offset there, and I'm a little bit less concerned about it now than I am about establishing sort of a spine there, that's like a block network, so to speak, on sort of the idea of shifting it. It's certainly a possibility, but I'm less focused on that than the improvements that could be done to sort of establish like the sidewalks on both sides, tree line, you know. But to your point, it's hard to juggle. Like one other thing that came up was construction access, just, you know, while that's construction's happening here, I think it was suggested somewhere, and they're like, well, we're gonna continue using this driveway, and I don't think that's realistic. So, you know, it's kind of suggesting that, well, if you have a driveway down here, is the assumption that people are at least be able to use this one, not that, you know, this is just happening in a vacuum, and somehow you're gonna get construction vehicles, the building goes up to almost the end of the red line, so.
But that driveway is not a great driveway, if somebody wants to turn left on Blue Street.
Of course, staging area for the building.
Yeah.
Right. It comes so the idea that the general public who's coming to the supermarkets is gonna be using that same driveway as well.
I think they're gonna be going up to Astoria Avenue.
Right. So again, and that's a temporary construction impact, that's a lesser concern than long-term results, but it's also another thing that needs to be practically considered for the larger project, not just the red, you know, blocks.
Brian, any other?
I was just following on what you just said. So if they don't have a layout area for construction on their site, they would have to contract for a layout area on other site. Does that give you any temporary oversight of the traffic pattern for the construction site? Because you can't just say, hey, I'm leasing out my driveway or my parking spaces for
Yeah,
dump trucks and
I think
gravel and
I think it definitely is reasonable, and, you know, and maybe again, it's a temporary impact as opposed to a long-term one, but I think it's completely reasonable to be within the scope of the ZBA's review there to look at those impacts. But I think particularly where it overlaps as well, as we talked about earlier, with something like the subdivision and the site plan approvals that are resulted in this driveway that is used by everybody, you know, including the landlord and other tenants. So at the end of the day, it's not unreasonable at all to kind of get a practical, you know, construction management plan to deal with how this project will be constructed, you know, as opposed to pretending and sort of not figuring that out until later on. Let's be realistic about the fact that people will need another way to get around that area. It might need more staging area. Where is that exactly go? Those are reasonable things, I think, to it. You know, it's not expected every little detail that might be addressed, but certainly for a city project, for instance, we address those things, you know, in advance.
but it would be helpful to list them because again, it's not temporary, it's a while.
It will be a while.
Temporary, like a week.
Yes, yeah, that's true. It'll be a
Then
while.
what you don't want is people making their own patterns. Oh, Canvas Road's closed.
Yeah.
Because it's not a public way, so that,
Yeah.
there's gotta be some way of addressing that. We could address it as a question. What is the plan?
Yeah.
I have a
Dave,
few
good.
more comments, yeah. Covered actually about half my comments in different parts, so I will not repeat those, but there's a couple process comments I have and then some architectural design comments. On the, back to the process, just a little bit, I kind of said one of the things I wanted to say about just what's unique about the LIP process, but there's more than just what I said. There's, when you use one of the subsidizing agencies, you also by this point would have a form of regulatory agreement. You would have start circulating draft of the affirmative power housing marketing plan. And I don't know what expertise the city is bringing to bear to help the CBA on those. I know we have a design consultant.
Yeah.
But you don't have the lender subsidizing agency here to
Yeah.
kind of impose those kinds of form documents. So I think the city needs to fill gaps there.
Yeah, and one thing I'll just say on that is that typically the state is actually reviewing that stuff, so we're gonna see a heavy role in the states reviewing the way that those have to be, they have to follow a certain standard to meet the.
I read the Pell, I read the, the Commonwealth Pell.
Yeah.
So I read that, and, it says basically give it to us when it's done, right? It's more like they want us to be working, in a normal 40B, it's kind of worked out before it gets, and they're not looking to like draft it with us, I think usually, so
Yeah,
I just think the city needs to be on top of some of those things.
Yeah.
Be on the radar at the moment.
yeah, I think that comment is a good one too. It's sort of parallel to what we had heard at one point from the Commonwealth related to Minko's project, so for instance, Route 1, where they were saying in essence, you know, even though, you know, in this case, you know, they could be submitting the fair housing marketing plan, you know, they've got the 40R approval there, they could be submitting that as they're getting through the cycle there on the 40B end of the subsidizing inventory and qualifying units. But here, to your point, it's not hard to, you know, there's a usual expectation of what the template of those documents is.
He has theirs.
It's not a
has
heavy,
theirs.
it's not a heavy lift, you know,
It's not.
so to provide those documents in advance, it benefits the Commonwealth, benefits the board, and it's something that they don't necessarily have to say entirely, well, let's condition the project approval upon the subsequent submission of those things. That could be included as, you know, we'd like to see the detail of that now. And
You can still use the forms from some of the subsidizing agencies.
Yeah.
I just don't think it would be good practice to wait until the very end.
Yeah.
Ready to approve, and then you start talking about these documents. They're kind of important. to keep
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And especially the things that some of the public have mentioned about like local preference, things like that, like those things would be kind of worked out through some of those documents. So, the other thing that just kind of is a flag for me, because, and I've worked on several 40Bs, but it's been a couple years, although not that long, that they said the pro forma was not required. Well, it was submitted to the Commonwealth for the Pell, so I don't understand, it's not a high bar pro forma, like it's not intended to really be that detailed. But it just kind of was a flag to me that they said it's not required, and I'm not sure why that is. If the state has it, I think we should have it, and it should be available for public.
Yeah, it's a great common question. I guess the way that I'll just summarize briefly my understanding of that, and I'm not gonna pretend to be an attorney, but in essence, it's the result of more recent interpretation in case law related to 40B and how that works. In essence, the application of the statute essentially is that the zoning board of appeals is not really entitled to look into the pro forma of the development unless there's initiated a discussion about improvements that are somehow argued then to be infeasible for them to incorporate the cost of. So that's why you see on the application, materials have been submitted, the attorney has asserted that ZBAs can't initially out of the gates expect as a additional application, like you might see for application materials being, complete, a pro forma dealing with the finances of the project. Now, we can all debate, on the spectrum on how we like that, the spectrum of 40B. But in essence, I think to your point, it's certainly reasonable. But the assumption here, I guess, is that if the ZBA is proposing, we see some improvements that need to be done here, some of the things you might mention tonight need to be done here, and the developer team, or applicant comes back and says, I can't absorb the cost of those things, then you're into a discussion about them demonstrating, their submission of a pro forma, walking through the numbers, and then potentially peer reviewing or discussing that. So I guess that's the answer to that is essentially that, and our attorney didn't, disagree with this, that the application of the statutes in the case law here on 40B is that you can't require it out the gates, essentially. That helps.
Well, that's one of the two reasons you have a pro forma. The other is to ensure that there's some mechanism on the limited dividend. Again, it's a very kind of, well, depending on how you look on it, low bar to prove.
Yeah.
But it needs to be on record. I mean, I guess it is on record. The state, someone could do a FOIA request, if there was ever an issue down the road. I just think it's odd that the city didn't request it. I think some people in the public might object to that, but I just want to flag it.
Sure.
There's other things that they're in the waivers that they're saying they shouldn't do that I think the city engineer, I think, is onto at least one of them, which is a stormwater management plan. Like, yeah, this was built decades ago with a plan that met those requirements, but it really needs to be the requirements. Like, that's one of the waivers that just really.
And I'm sorry, which issue you're referring to? You're referring to stormwater?
The stormwater management plan.
Yeah,
It's one of the
okay.
request waivers.
The
That,
city.
yep.
The city stormwater.
Yeah, that just
State is
didn't.
actually just as.
Yeah, I think, and I'll direct you only to, if you want to take a look at John Eric White, the city engineer, put some comments of his own in a letter for DPS, addressing some of that. I think, I don't want to speak for him, but my understanding is that he's less concerned about them going through the stormwater management ordinance, the separate ordinance they have to go through that process, as much as he is concerned about the specific issues he identified in his letter. And so that also overlaps with some things because he had recognized in his letter that Phil Christensen, the peer reviewer that we usually have, has already commented on a range of things in his letter, which is a couple of pages. So John Eric was only commenting beyond that. So at the end of the day, I guess John Eric White seemed to think that the issues that he's concerned about on the spectrum of stormwater review, whether it's done through this process or the general ordinance, is captured by those comments at this point. But to your point, there are some things in there that have been identified, and actually, we had a meeting already with the Bowler team for the applicant because they were sent home to kind of get some more data, update some information on the plans, things that didn't, some of the things that didn't make sense initially. And I think that's largely an artifact of getting a somewhat schematic submission initially. The Bowler team needed to flush out some more details with more precision and more accuracy. So whether it's the location of a few things or perhaps the calculations and things like that, that we are expecting a revised submission. We are expecting a number of those things in the boxes to be checked for things. But to your point, there might be still a few things in there, and the city engineer has commented on a few of those as well.
Okay, so just as the last comment on process, I mean, I think as our board, we're not the permitting granting authority, but like, I think we should just provide the moral support to the CBA and to city staff that, we should have a right to push back on these things. Even the friendliest of friendly 40Bs have offsite mitigation, have substantial changes between the initial submission and a final permit. So I think these are all like things that we should push for. I'll leave those alone. Demo process. A couple design comments I had. Generally, I think it's okay. Like, I think it's just kind of generic apartment building that's not bad. I think it's a great start. I actually agree too. I think actually when I first saw it, like, oh, this jumpstarts Story Ave. But I think there are some areas where it can be done better. We've already covered the garage, so I won't cover that anymore. I'm sure everyone else has to think. The biggest thing that I noticed were like more up on the high side. Like, where's the entrance? Like, it's kind of unusual to have a residential building without entrance. Several issues came up to me as I was thinking about it. First of all, it's not clear where the entrance is. Like, there's a driveway that's way back behind where it is. visitors are really gonna park in the other parking lot that's not associated with this building. So there's all kinds of issues just to be related to like how you arrive at this as a residential building with an entrance. And then even weirder is the area where I think they must think it's also weird is where the building intersects with the existing shop. I know they think it's weird because they put a person and a bunch of trees in front of it, so so I just think that's like a really weird zone that needs to be thought through.
And those are residents right there.
Yeah, so, this gets, I mean, there are future things that can happen with a shopping center that can make that better, but right now, that's just like super, super weird. And it's a lost opportunity maybe not to have doors to those units, or there's a lot of things that maybe should be considered there to make that better. It's just such a strange.
Can you include the phrase, super weird in that?
Yeah.
It kind of characterizes it very well.
So in architecture school, like, the professors always know when you're not doing your hardest work in an area, like where you put the trees.
Where radio.
Right.
No, but the plan has residences right to the end of that, on that first floor. Like, there's not, those are from that, like, almost predominantly all residences. And then you see somewhere on the plan, there's an access point to the bikes, which are somewhere in behind. It's interesting, you're right, and I don't think that they've got a full particular area just yet, because some of it almost look like there's an access to the loading dock area through there, and some just goes right up against the building.
All right, I said my piece. Yeah,
helpful.
Yeah.
I will never look at a rendering. I know everyone has some trees in there too.
That's where you gotta scrutinize.
This is why we want people with design background.
So, Matt.
Right.
You mentioned the bikes.
Yes.
They're not showing this in the site plan. Is that what we're calling the utility room?
Yeah, the bikes are in the back, the bikes are in the rear, kind of like a police station. There's like a cage. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, no, on the first floor?
Yeah, next, yeah.
Oh, those are little bikes that.
Because it shows, oh, I see, it's a very small bike storage. They don't have very many bikes.
Yeah, so I think,
That's really,
yeah. It'll be a popular area.
that was one of my comments, is that you need to,
Yeah, and then the only way up is through the loading area, if you will, they make a larger.
and then that two-bedroom unit that is
Right there.
right there looks out under the canopy for the next building next door.
And I know tenants can change, but what's the tenant in there is like.
Is that Elements still? Or is it?
Yeah.
Used to be Radio Shack.
Yeah.
There's no lot of site on the site. If you look at the red map, there's not a lot of site. Right. On the site. Yeah. So.
Well, we utilize, so.
So by last time, actually,
So that's what I'm saying, yeah.
my last comment, and I think I heard Bob and Rick talking about this, they're talking about a different application, but there's no way some other open space and lot coverage counts.
The roof, the side area was calculated as part of that.
Yeah. So that's,
So that's not open.
Well, again, to your point, yeah.
Calculations.
This came up very early.
Does not consider the park. And in their calculations, open space assumes that landscaped courtyard part of open space. Neither of those are consistent with
that's the only way you can get to those numbers.
There's a much bigger footprint, and there's much less open space.
So these spaces up here, raised spaces. Again, this, then you have to debate like what's appropriate, location, scale of project and everything, but here, obviously, it's not, none of that's correct. Yeah, so
It's just not consistent with our definition of either one of them.
It doesn't serve an open space function.
If we all went there and tried to use it, you'll see whether it's open space or not.
Like the pool.
We're here.
Well, does it even count? I mean, those courtyards are not, they're paved mostly, aren't they?
Well, one of them, there's some,
There's no open space,
there's vegetation and
but very small, except plots, right?
for the most part, yeah. Yeah, well, again, I mean, and I grant this is me as a land use planner, in the context of 40B, but I'm less concerned about the precision. I know right off the bat, that this doesn't meet the usual calculation for open space. The question here is,
I guess my concern
yeah,
is, let's not call it open space.
if it's not,
Yeah, let's say it's 0.1% open space, not
Yeah.
whatever they're claiming, because,
Yeah.
because it's not real open space.
yeah, again, this is reasonable stuff to comment on. It came up initially when we were reviewing one of the tables, their early drawings, coming out of the same set in PAT. Initially, right out of the gate, just some of the calculations didn't make sense, for instance, in that perspective. Again, after you have a policy discussion about what makes sense, is an urban area, is it reasonable to have a different ratio of open space, is it reasonable to have above grade count for some reason, is it publicly accessible, all that kind of stuff, but here.
But I guess my point is, let's not say, well, this is an urban area, so we're gonna call this urban space, open space, even though it doesn't meet the definition. If we wanna say that, let's say, we don't require any open space. here.
Oh, I concur.
That's,
Yeah, I agree.
that's because otherwise,
Yeah, I
we're
agree.
gonna get put in a precedent situation where somebody else can say, well, let's call our roof garden open space.
Yeah, oh, yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah.
And that site's gonna have a lot of activity over the years. And the last thing you want is like, let it. No one's anything here.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that's the-
Yeah. Well, and again, in future developments, in the area, you might think, we might be looking for more accurate, open space, if you will, a public, plaza type space, for instance, connecting spaces, that public space is what around quasi-public, even in a situation like this, is what makes for successful urban design. So having some integration there that's at ground level, this really only has the ground level around the building as sort of like a trim, if you will.
Yeah.
So having something like that on a go-forward basis, we would want normally something a little bit larger than the ground level we're actually seeing on the plan, right?
And it's easier to always say, well, in that comment period, we might waive it or some other benefit.
Right.
If you just, like you said, if you skew the definition,
Just to be clear.
then you're debating the definition, which is.
Right. Yeah, I think the unit count per acre, I think initially was also something that studied, just the way it was calculated or something, didn't, like, it wasn't accurate the way that, again, there was some stuff in the numbers. Again, I recognize before you me we know those things are gonna be up, because they, right out of the gates, if we don't comply with your zoning, we're looking for some waivers. But to your point, they're all worthwhile things to point out, because it then flips to, all right, but, mitigate, so to speak.
Question, when I looked at I didn't make it to the, for whatever reason, but I saw the presentation online. I mean, their slide presentation.
Yeah.
And they used an illustration from your smart growth zoning district about the building setback. And I didn't know why they did that, because their building doesn't meet that.
I'll leave it to them to speak to, but I think what they were trying to say and understand it was, we tried to
It's not
adapt,
even close.
not on every side. But they tried to, essentially what they were trying to say is, we did try as best we could with the volume and number of units to step back levels. To your point, maybe let's talk about the particulars as they really meet the
Well,
definition.
no, just wondering whether they told the zoning board that they were following what you have in your smart growth. Because they used it in their
In
presentation.
a couple of, I think it might be written slightly different in two different places. So like I think it might be written that, they tried to, I think in essence, it says they tried to follow, meaning they didn't follow every standard perfectly. They didn't follow every standard, but they tried to incorporate a number of the design expectations. So I think to your point, you can point out the particulars where we think those haven't, that matter.
I'm not sure, no, I guess my question is, why did they use that illustration?
To my understanding, I think it was primarily to point out things like, again, you could talk about the particulars of the slopes and individual circumstances, but I think they were trying to show, for instance, that they made an effort to step back, say, this upper piece here, depending, you could debate how far, whether that's the right slope and all that. But I think they were trying to make the case that the volume of a large, even though it's a large envelope as a whole, that because of some of these smaller step backs that are done here, that helps to reduce upper volume.
Oh, I understand that.
Yeah.
I guess my concern is still, why did they use your illustration from the smart growth zoning?
benefit, they could
I'll
say,
let the applicant, again, the applicant, I'll speak.
we were shooting for this standard, we're off by this. Like, if you're gonna be,
It's
Transparent.
63.4 degrees was the slope intended.
Yeah.
And that wasn't it.
Yeah.
It's more like 89.
Yeah.
Again, the larger context, going back a couple of years was, it was suggested to them by the city, what about allowing for residential and, having a zoning change, and that just came up in conversations based on the vacancy here. And we were interested, and then the reaction I was getting was sort of like, we're not really interested in, any zoning changes in this area. And all of a sudden, we're sort of back having the exact same discussion. It's sort of like, we're interested in having, some zoning changes, and that was rolling into, why don't we do something like the 40R? So you would expect, if with all other things being equal, it's exactly the same standards of 40R plot down there, unless we're talking about something different. Of course, there was the need for higher density than the 40R allow to facilitate this project, building size footprint, for instance, much larger than we will allow in the 40R district. The overall massing is too large to meet the 40R district. So to your point, like, there are some things that were maybe capture match, some not, and even the council's attempt to create the Peapod or Port Plaza overlay district piece didn't quite, like, it had some things that went a little further for density, but didn't quite go to this point either. But tried to reference the 40R district standards with the assumption that, maybe all those standards might be low.
Yeah, that's not answering my question, but.
I know what you're saying.
Well, you get
Tracking this,
if you're asking me as
like,
a
trying.
I didn't know whether there was something during the meeting where they said they were considering the 40R
I think
standard.
it was just a brief mention that they had tried to follow or incorporate that. We can then debate how much. Because they haven't gotten to the full blown, presentation of the architecture debate or the details, we'll probably see that flesh out further. I think they only made kind of a cursory passing note to the fact that they were trying to incorporate
Best thing to-
to the extent they thought feasible based on the project.
Okay.
Again, it's more informed by the scale of the project and,
It's what they want to build. That's basically what it is.
Yeah,
You can't meet your zoning if we want to build what we want to.
well, you're gonna call out the things that you do meet as opposed to the thing, then you have to debate,
No, I guess it was just very confusing to me to have them reference a standard that they didn't even come close to meeting. Yeah.
Feel free to comment on any of that.
Any other comments from the other side of the room?
The signal analysis, I think, is potentially gonna come back and suggest a signal that we don't want one. For safety purposes of pedestrian viewing,
We don't want one?
well, I mean, it's not a favorable step. This, generally speaking, signals are not a favorable step for the neighborhood.
I think we need a signal.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think especially with the increased density that we're likely to see.
Yeah.
Maybe this project may or may not be the one that trips the threshold, but it doesn't take much more to trip that threshold wherever it is.
Right, and even if it doesn't trip the threshold, it's gonna create us, that's not a safe area.
Right.
Got any other?
I had a bunch of things, but I can add, I guess I had concerns about, so people who know codes better than me. So they've got 3 resident handicap parking spaces for 11 accessible units. They have 4 outside property they don't own, but it seems to me that they should have maybe 11 handicap parking spaces in the garage as opposed to 3. It doesn't seem like, I don't know how they get by with it. They're using those offsite handicap spaces to meet their handicap parking ratio. I don't know if you can do that. So no matter how you count it, if you say 1 per unit, which is less than the parking ratio, then you get 11 handicap parking spaces. And if you said 5% of the total garage unit, you have 12. It seems that's the numbers somewhere in that area. I think most of this stuff is, I had some concern about sidewalks and bicycle lanes and that kind of stuff. Those are things we can talk about in general. But handicap parking seemed like it was something missing. And if you add those handicap units in, then you can.
Just your summary. Um, so I'll just give you a quick overview of my comments. We talked about a lot of coverage in space, calculation. About the garage, exits. Just in terms of sidewalk, I think we talked about this previously. What I see on the site generally is, doesn't feel like an urban solution to me. In terms of sidewalks and street trees. And again, there's an inconsistency between the architectural drawings and the renderings and the civil and landscape plans. Architectural drawings are loaded with street trees and none of those appear. So, you know, maybe they're hiding details. I think there needs to be some discussion about what typically, that we would like to see street trees, tree grades, a landscape buffer that is typically 2 to 3 feet wide at the curb, and then a pedestrian zone inboard of that. I'm fine with trees inside of the sidewalk along Low Street, so I would vary that requirement there, but they show trees along Low Street on the architectural drawings. So there's some significant inconsistencies there, and I think the sidewalk detail and landscape concept need to be talked about. So it's more urban in character and hopefully more consistent with what the broader district would look like. This thing involved. We talked a little bit about the circulation on the north side of the building. I would go so far as to say they need to establish the other side of the street. The north side of that 2-lane circulation, so it's actually defined as a street. And you're not driving through a lot that's shared with the retail. So I think that's another one of the items that are off-site considerations that they need to think about. The architectural drawings show monument signs in 2 locations, and I think if I'm reading the proposed sign regulations correctly, freestanding signs are allowed outside of the business.
Sorry, you're talking about the new amendment that we just approved.
Yeah, so monument sign.
Yeah.
This right. Yeah, another one up on the, near the front. I don't think those are allowable. Proposed.
I think they asked for signage waiver.
Yeah, they're asking for waivers, so to the extent you feel like there's a design issue, feel free to let me know. They've asked for waivers, you know, right?
When you're doing urban design developments like this, I hate the concept of monument signs because they are the antithesis of trying to create a sort of environment.
And you've got a building, you can put the sign up, I mean, is it?
So I just would raise that issue that this is kind of inconsistent with where we would like to go in terms of the I don't see a lot of information yet about lighting. Both street light fixtures and building mounted.
Yeah, they did at least verbally indicate they were gonna get some such information.
So again, that's kind of a streetscape issue that I think there needs to be a lot more information provided and more consistency between plans. On architectural plans, the parking garage doesn't have a lot of open perimeter, which means it's mechanically ventilated. I don't see any movers on the building anywhere. So I don't know where that garage exhaust happens. But there's a lot of pedestrian circulation around the perimeter. Good to know where they're anticipating this garage going. The residential units at grade adjacent to the commercial space on the north side, I just think it's just, I hope we can talk about it. I think it's a terrible location. not a great. There are three comments, and I'll just repeat here. I'm not sure they should go with any letter to the ZBA because I think they're outside of our review. And Jamie, I'd be interested in your point of view on these, but I think for the units at grade along Low Street, I think there's a second means of egress required. And right now, we have to an undefined park. I think there needs to be a rated exit to door there. So that has not been addressed. There are stair transfers, particularly on the north side of the building from the parking garage up to grade, that will affect floor plan at grade, particularly at the northwest corner. If you look at the stair in the garage, it's at the perimeter, and this stair is inboard, and where they transfer their expanded footprint will affect that space. Again, that's internal planning. That's not something we need to get involved with, but it's not working in plan. Building elevations generally are generic. They don't really have any particular reference to Newburyport. A large percent of the exterior is clad in fiber cement board. There's a significant portion of the north elevation, which is what you see from Story Avenue, what you see from, the balance of this development to the north. At least 50% of that is exclusively fiber cement. And most of that is gray. A couple of tones of gray, but dark gray in color, not the friendliest expression that I can think of. So that, to me, could be thought about. You can get fiber cement panels in lots of different colors. And I think they could think a little bit beyond the gray tones of this and help the building quite a bit. Building massing, just generally, they've created a lot of perimeter building massing, which gives them more units, which I get. And the advantage of all of that is that this appears to kind of break down into an assemblage of buildings rather than one significant monolithic structure. It would be nice to see the exterior materials vary a little bit from wing to wing so that it reinforces the idea that this is a collection of buildings. Right now, it's just the same expression everywhere. The roof plan, there is no roof plan provided, and just like we talked about with the Merrimack Street, there will be mechanical equipment on the roof. There'll be a lot more on this roof than what we're talking about on Merrimack Street. I'd like to understand what they're planning on the roof, screening. You're going to see a lot of stuff. So that has not been addressed in either elevation. So those are my comments. Any other comments? If not, I would just ask if you have anything written, you could get it to Andy, to me. We'll try to start.
Andy, the traffic demand management recommendations from the,
From there.
from the.
Yeah.
They have some recommendations. What happens to those? If they just sit there as part of the recommendations and they're not incorporated into the plans?
Just like we always think about here, CBA is getting to think about whether or not they've clearly and coherently incorporated things. There was, I think I mentioned, the consultant, for instance, said that the applicant, they agreed that they should commit, that it would make sense for the applicant to have the board condition some of the things that were referenced in there, but to your point, if there's the board should always be clear enough and unambiguous in making sure that things that might have been presented or represented or spoken to us along the way are incorporated in the decision. At the end of the day, so no one feels like something was mentioned or suggested along the way isn't actually a requirement, and, people expect it to happen, and it's like, oh, no, that got missed. So, I agree, you want to have enough specificity, they want to have enough specificity, and
So this sort of comes to that whole issue of financial feasibility and whether things can fit on the site. So one of the recommendations was that they have EV charging stations.
Mhm.
And there aren't any EV charging stations on the site now. Those EV charging stations then further, just like the handicap spaces, further reduce the space available from the parking space. Yeah, I'm not sure how we address that. Do we, is that something that gets addressed, presented as a recommendation from us to the zoning board, that the zoning board can take it and say,
yeah, I would include something, again, you might want to think about when you group your comments in different categories. Just sort of like something like both, text at the beginning of each bullet or something, just to clarify what it's talking about, but you might want to group things some way and speak to those things. I think that relates tangentially to something else that, the waivers listed from the ZBA, from local regulations. There's also a request to waive chapter 5, which is the building section, but it's the way of the entire section. There's no clarification of what's in there that they're specifically referring to. So I'd ask for further information. Have not heard back in a couple weeks about that, to supplement the ZBA's record, what particularly, but that includes the net zero goals or energy efficiency goals of the city that are referenced in this super stretch. So at the end of the day, it's not clear, are they asking to waive essentially the energy efficiency of this building, going forward. And so we're asking for more information on that, but I imagine that will come up here because it's not clear on the gates that they are already intending to comply with the, it's not called super stretch. Yeah. So at any rate, I don't know what that will be in terms of any solar panels, don't know what that will be for energy efficiency, building itself, EV spaces and whatnot, sort of tangentially touches on this stuff. And so it's worth fleshing out that area. I mentioned that one only because it relates a little bit to some of that.
People at the city aware of the 10% 3-bedroom requirement as well, watching that, because I know that's included, so it looks like they need it, but
Yeah.
just in case like the building starts moving.
Yeah, so the ZBA, it's not common for ZBA members or boards themselves to remember all those details. Obviously, we might flag something like that. The state's obviously going to flag something like that, and they're going to have to modify the plan order to have to comply with that. That board probably right now is not. I don't think it's come up yet. It's probably focused.
But the staff's aware.
We know that that's something that could, come into play depending on what changes are made. In the case of, I'm trying to remember what I'm talking about, in the case of the Route 1 project for Minco, the state subsequently came back and said, look, we've looked at your interior layout of some of the units, and we actually want you to change one or two of them because we're concerned about the distribution of the affordable units within the building, essentially. So there are things like that will come up. In this case, it was a state that was flagging a little bit concerned. It was more about in this case, where they stacking all the affordable units on each floor in the same place versus distributing them. So things like that will come up. That's another example. Yeah, that's in the spectrum too. That if something gets tweaked, it might trip another.
what is the time frame? What is it? There's a 90-day period of some sort.
Maybe it's 6 months basically.
It's six-
Yeah,
From when?
180 days basically is from the file.
From time?
So again, that could be extended if you agree, but the board has to make a decision within that timeframe. And so they're doing peer reviews. They had continued. There was a little bit more time needed on traffic. They decided to focus solely on that first. While other things are sort of more information being gathered in other areas, more comments coming in for their consideration in those other areas like this. But they were first focused on building traffic. That seemed like an obvious area of focus for concern for everybody. So they were obviously very known. So they have basically 180 days in total from when that application was filed.
So
To issue.
December is the deadline?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's coming pretty fast.
Yeah, basically it's a matter of months. Unless there's a desire to extend the timeframe, well, there's an assumption that with the information available to them, they will make a decision to either approve, deny, or approve, subsequent conditions or whatever. Mitigate development impact. So again, earlier you gave your comments when Bob and I talked earlier, I thought, if you wait till your next meeting to issue, look at a comprehensive letter that's put together cohesively, that probably makes sense here. I think it's helpful. That's probably the last meeting I would go to before giving comments to ZBA, only because you want to get into them as soon as possible. But I do think here, given the fact that you've got a lot of good substance in there for them to look at, it'd be good if it was organized in a way where. I think it makes sense to have we'll get the next meeting and then we'll get it right. So that they can consider that. And that'll also come in kind of maybe simultaneously, actually right before maybe, some of the comments coming from the architects. So they can share, some of these communications so that they can kind of take, just like we do with traffic comments that are overlapping each other. And we can see each other's comments.
When are those likely to come
I would say probably about 3 weeks out from now, maybe 3 weeks. So those will be on our next agenda. We'll just get ready.
Any other comments, issues?
As always, I wonder what's happening in Minko and Aries.
Oh, great question. They obviously not this season. But I have been in communication with them, and it's not, it's not exactly clear the timing. There's like, Lou does continue to make reference to concerns about the international stuff, the tax, tariff type things that are going on and how that's influencing the purchase of things. The difficulty getting things like the transformers and whatnot. So I know there's been a little bit of hesitation there about going full bore with the construction of that project. With one, he has been working out some of the details. Obviously, we've seen some of that stuff for you. But obviously, it doesn't look like this season is when that's kicking off. I think a lot of us are city secretaries are going back saying, does that mean spring of 26? Because we all put a lot of time into permitting for this, right? And I know he's interested in that. A lot of us are like, it gets a couple of years, we're wondering what's taking a while. So yeah, I'll have to ask, again on that, but I know that we still have a little bit of concerns, about the market and costs.
I was wondering, because I know he's moving forward, with this project in the engineering, so I wonder that's.
I know that bandwidth is also something that comes into account, that you take into account, so they don't necessarily do all projects. So that is the factor I know, we playing a role here. But part of it's been the economics. He did, I think somebody might recall, he came back a while. Everyday community was happening and saying, the percent of before law. And basically saying, I don't think it's gonna happen. But that's that. So, I didn't debate that, but yeah, that's what I think. He started saying, like, when's the worst time to, cost for people, so.
The longer you wait, the worse.
Are you getting any nibbles at all on Parker Street?
For the lots?
Well,
Yeah, it's funny. I would expect the people to be sort of clamoring. And it hasn't been like, right out of the gates, people saying like, we got a concept, here's what we want to do. So, no, I'll ask Jennifer as well. She said, normally we're having a conversation about something later. I haven't seen any people diving in saying, I got a concept for this lot or these lots together. But you would think in the context of all the housing interests in the Commonwealth and regionally, and it seems like low hanging fruit to do a project there. I guess we'll have to see. Reach out to property owners, but it's just surprising actually that we have next one we'll start to pick up.
Okay. If there are no other comments or questions, I will ask for motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
All those in favor? Opposed? Meeting is adjourned.